Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we are back with more of Albert Einstein's ideas and opinions. We are going to be reading a long piece called Science and Religion. Part 1 is from an address at Princeton Theological Seminary, May the 19th, 1939, published in Out of My Later Years, which was published by New York's Philosophical Library, 1950. Philosophical. See, that was so much easier to say after I struggled through that. Part 2 is from Science, Philosophy, and Religion, a symposium published by the Conference on Science, Philosophy, and Religion in their relation to the democratic way of life. New York, 1941. Let's get into this. Part 1. During the last century, and part of the one before, it was widely held that there was an unreconcilable conflict between knowledge and belief. The opinion prevailed among advanced minds that it was time that belief should be replaced increasingly by knowledge. Belief that did not itself rest on knowledge was superstition, and as such had to be opposed. According to this conception, the sole function of education was to open the way of thinking and knowing, and the school, as the outstanding organ for the people's education, must serve that end exclusively. One will probably find, but rarely, if at all, the rationalistic standpoint expressed in such crass form, for any sensible man would see at once how one-sided is such a statement of the position. But it is just as well to state a thesis starkly and nakedly, if one wants to clear up one's mind as to its nature. It is true that convictions can best be supported with experience and clear thinking. On this point, one must agree unreservedly with the extreme rationalist. The weak point of his conception is, however, this that those convictions which are necessary and determinate for our conduct and judgments cannot be found solely along this solid scientific way. For our scientific method can teach us nothing else beyond how facts are related to and conditioned by each other. The aspiration toward each objective knowledge belongs to the highest of which man is capable, and you will certainly not suspect me of wishing to belittle the achievements and heroic efforts of man in this sphere. Yet it is equally clear that knowledge of what is does not open the door directly to what should be. One can have the clearest and most complete knowledge of what is, and yet not be able to deduct from that knowledge, or yet not be able to deduct from that what should be the great or be the goal of human aspirations. Objective knowledge provides us with the powerful instruments for the achievement of certain ends, but the ultimate goal itself and the longing to reach it must come from another source. And it is hardly necessary to argue for the view that our existence and our activity acquire meaning only by the setting up of such a goal and of corresponding values. The knowledge of truth as such is wonderful, but it is so little capable of acting as a guide that it cannot prove even the justification and the value of the aspiration toward that very knowledge of truth. Here we face, therefore, the limits of the purely rational conception of our existence. But it must not be assumed that intelligent thinking can play no part in the formation of the goal of ethical judgments. When someone realizes that for the achievement of an end certain means would be useful, the means itself becomes thereby an end. Intelligence makes clear to us that interrelation of means and ends. But mere thinking cannot give us a sense of the ultimate and fundamental ends. To make clear these fundamental ends and valuations, and to set them fast in the emotional life of the individual, seems to me precisely the most important function which religion has to perform in the social life of man. And if one asks whence derives the authority of such fundamental ends, since they cannot be stated and justified merely by reason, one can only answer, they exist in a healthy society as powerful traditions, which act upon the conduct and aspirations and judgments of the individuals. They are there, that is, as something living, without it being necessary to find justification for their existence. They come into being not through demonstration, but through revelation. Through the medium of powerful personalities, one must not attempt to justify them, but rather to sense their nature simply and clearly. The highest principles of our aspirations and judgments are given to us in the Jewish Christian religious tradition. It is a very high goal which, with our weak powers, we can reach only very inadequately, but which gives a sure foundation to our aspirations and valuations. If one were to take that goal out of its religious form and look merely at its purely human side, one might state it perhaps thus: free and responsible development of the individual so that he may place his powers freely and gladly in the service of all mankind. There is no room in this for the divination of the nation, or a class, let alone of an individual. We are not all children of the Father, as it is said in religious language. Indeed, even the divination of humanity as an abstract totality would not be in the spirit of that idea. It is only to the individual that a soul is given, and the high destiny of the individual is to serve rather than to rule or to impose himself in any other way. If one looks at the substance rather than the form, then one can take these words as expressing also the fundamental democratic position. The true democrat can worship his nation as little as can the man who is religious, in our sense of the term. What, then, in all this is the function of education and of the school? They should help the young person to grow up in such a spirit that these fundamental principles should be to him as the air which he breathes. Teaching alone cannot do that. If one holds these high principles clearly before one's eyes and compares them with the life and spirit of our times, then it appears glaringly that civilized mankind finds itself at present in grave danger. If the totalitarian states, it is the rulers themselves who strive actually to destroy that spirit of humanity. In less threatened parts, it is nationalism and intolerance, as well as the oppression of individuals by economic means, which threaten to choke the most precious traditions. A realization of how great a danger is spreading, however, among thinking people, and there is, is much for means with which to meet the danger. Means in the field of national and international politics, of legislation, or organization in general. Such efforts are, no doubt, greatly needed. Yet the ancients knew something which we seem to have forgotten. All means prove but a blunt instrument if they have not behind them a living spirit, but if the longing for the achievement of the goal is powerfully alive within us, then shall we not like the strength to find the means for reaching the goal and for translating it into death? And I think I'll stop there because part two is several pages. Yeah, that about five pages in length. We've already read about three and a half there. Yeah, three and a half. But yeah. So once again, blah 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 blah. Einstein is kind of caught between the religious and the scientific. And he wants to give the religious its complete due, but as a scientist, he also finds issues. Um, when they began to think of how big the universe was, Einstein originally thought it was a static state universe. It wasn't expanding, it wasn't shrinking, it was just was. It always was. At least for him. Later, we did find out, yeah, the universe was growing. And as much as Einstein said he didn't like the thought that it may be growing, because he had always hoped that there was a spot for religion in it. Science showed that, yeah, it was growing. And he said, I have to just accept that. Well, I don't know the exact words or anything, but that was kind of the idea. He was a proponent of a static state universe, but that's kind of what's going on here. He's wanting to give religion its full due, and he says you have to look at it through both lenses. He says science at one point even tried to take down the religious because it was more or less an unscientifically proven thing. But he's essentially saying there is a necessity for hope, for faith. We have to kind of look at it in both lenses, because for many people it's a hopeless world if you look at it without. But as a scientist, he can't help but look at it through both, and he's kind of caught in the middle. He's like, I don't know. The scientist in me says I can't say for sure, but the everyday person in me says I want to believe. I hope. I want to have faith. So yeah, at least that's how I see it. But as always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. But as always, I'll see you all in the next episode. Until then, later.